Sometimes the most broken people find each other in the most unexpected moments. When single father Logan crashes his helicopter with a wealthy CEO aboard, neither expects what happens next in that grounded cockpit. Logan is a helicopter pilot trying to raise his daughter alone after losing his wife. Beck is a successful CEO who's forgotten what real connection feels like. When a storm forces their aircraft down, she stays by his side and wraps him in a blanket as rain pounds the windows. He talks about his daughter and his regrets. She listens, really listens, for the first time in years. What starts as an emergency becomes something neither saw coming. But what happens when two broken souls find healing in the most unexpected place? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The emergency radio's static filled Connor's kitchen at 11:47 p.m., crackling through the quiet house like an unwelcome visitor. He'd been washing dinner dishes while 8-year-old Sophie finished her homework at the small table nearby, her pencil tapping rhythmically against her math worksheet. The sound made him pause, dish towel still in his hands, water dripping from a plate back into the sink. "Dad, what's that noise?" Sophie asked, looking up from her fractions with tired eyes that reminded him so much of Lisa, it still took his breath away sometimes. "Just work, sweetheart. Finish up those problems." Connor dried his hands and moved to the radio mounted near the back door, its red light blinking insistently. He'd been a helicopter pilot for 15 years, the last 2 as an independent contractor after leaving the Coast Guard. Emergency calls weren't unusual, but they rarely came this late. The dispatcher's voice cut through the static. "Connor, we've got a priority pickup. Coastal Estate executive needs transport. Weather's getting rough out there." Connor glanced at Sophie, who was pretending to focus on her homework while obviously listening. Since Lisa's accident 2 years ago, these late-night calls had become a source of anxiety for his daughter. She'd already lost one parent to an unexpected moment. The idea of him flying into storms made her small face tighten with worry. "Can it wait until morning?" Connor asked into the radio, though he already knew the answer. Priority calls meant someone with enough money to make waiting impossible. Negative. Client specifically requested immediate pickup. Premium rate. The words carried weight Connor couldn't ignore. Sophie's school had sent another note home about her needing additional tutoring help, and the bills from Lisa's medical treatments still arrived monthly like persistent ghosts. His wife had fought cancer for 8 months before that final. Terrible car ride to the hospital, a trip she'd made alone, because Connor had been flying a rich businessman to a golf tournament. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone, cold and immovable. "Copy that. Send me coordinates." Sophie's pencil stopped moving. "Do you have to go?" Connor knelt beside her chair, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. She'd inherited Lisa's delicate features, but his stubborn chin, creating a combination that was purely her own. "It's just a quick flight, Bug. Mrs. Peterson next door will come sit with you." "I don't like Mrs. Peterson. She smells like cats and makes me drink weird tea." Despite everything, Connor smiled. Mrs. Peterson did indeed smell like cats, and her homemade chamomile tea tasted like grass clippings. "She cares about you. And I'll be back before you wake up." Sophie's lower lip trembled slightly, a tell Connor had learned to recognize. "You said that before." When Mommy went to the hospital, the stone in his chest grew heavier. Lisa had died on a rainy night, not unlike this one, driving herself to the emergency room while Connor was 3 hours away, earning money they desperately needed for her treatments. By the time he'd gotten the call and flown back, she was gone. "This is different," Connor said, though the words felt hollow. "I promise." 20 minutes later, Mrs. Peterson arrived in her moth-eaten sweater and orthopedic shoes, smelling exactly as advertised. Sophie submitted to the elderly woman's fussing with resigned dignity, accepting a kiss on her forehead from Connor with the solemnity of someone far older than her years. "Be safe," Sophie whispered against his ear, and Connor's heart clenched. The drive to the helipad took 15 minutes through increasingly heavy rain. Connor's helicopter, a well-maintained Bell 407, sat waiting under the hangar lights like a faithful horse. He'd named her Clarity, after Lisa had pointed out that flying was the only time Connor's restless mind found peace. The irony wasn't lost on him now. His sanctuary had become his burden. Pre-flight checks revealed nothing concerning despite the weather. Connor had flown in worse conditions, though he preferred not to. The coordinates led to Ocean View Estates, one of those exclusive coastal communities where houses sold for more than most people made in a lifetime. The kind of place where someone thought nothing of calling a helicopter at midnight. As Clarity lifted into the storm-darkened sky, Connor tried to push away thoughts of Sophie sleeping in her pink bedroom, Mrs. Peterson's snoring probably already echoing from the living room couch. His daughter had been struggling since Lisa's death. Nightmares, difficulty concentrating in school, a tendency to cling to Connor whenever he prepared to leave. The grief counselor said it was normal, that children Sophie's age often feared. Abandonment after losing a parent. Normal didn't make it. Easier to bear. The coastal estate appeared through the rain, like something from a magazine, sprawling, modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows that glowed warmly against the storm. Connor set Clarity down on the private helipad, rotors still spinning as a figure emerged from the house. She moved unsteadily through the rain, designer heels clicking against wet pavement. Even from the cockpit, Connor could see she'd been drinking, her usually perfect posture slightly off balance, one hand trailing along a railing for support. This was his passenger, Avery Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Enterprises. A woman whose face appeared regularly in business magazines and whose company's helicopters he'd flown before. But tonight, she looked different, vulnerable, human. Connor had seen Avery at various corporate events over the years, always impeccably dressed and radiating the kind of confident authority that came with success. Tonight, her dark hair was slightly mussed, her makeup smudged, and her elegant black dress wrinkled as if she'd been sitting on the floor. She climbed into the passenger seat with careful, deliberate movements, buckling herself in before meeting Connor's eyes. "Thank you for coming out in this weather. Just doing my job, Mom." Connor's voice was professional, though he noticed something fragile in her expression that he hadn't seen before. "Where are we headed?" "Home. Downtown." She gave him an address he recognized, one of the city's most exclusive high-rises. "I'm sorry about the timing. The fundraiser ran later than expected, and She stopped, looking out at the rain. "I shouldn't have driven," Connor nodded, appreciating her honesty. "Too many wealthy clients insisted they were fine when they clearly weren't." "No problem. Better safe than sorry." As Clarity lifted into the night sky, Connor couldn't shake the feeling that this flight would be different from all the others. Something in Avery's voice, perhaps, or the way she sat so quietly beside him, watching the storm through the window with an expression he couldn't quite read. If he'd known what the next hour would bring, Connor might have found an excuse to delay. Might have suggested waiting until morning, weather be damned. Instead, he flew straight into the storm that would change everything. The storm hit them hard 20 minutes into the flight, turning what should have been a routine trip into something far more dangerous. Connor's hands remained steady on the controls as Clarity bucked and swayed through the turbulent air, but he could feel Avery tense beside him with each violent gust. "How often do you fly in weather like this?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled, despite the fear Connor could hear underneath. "More than I'd like, less than some pilots." Connor adjusted their altitude, seeking smoother air. "She's built for this kind of thing. We'll be fine." The wedding ring on his left hand caught the instrument panel's glow as he worked the controls, a simple gold band he'd worn for 10 years, 5 of them as a widower. He noticed Avery's eyes drift to it, then quickly away, and wondered what story she saw there. Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to make the helicopter's frame vibrate. Avery's knuckles went white where she gripped the armrest, and Connor found himself wanting to reassure her, despite the professional distance he usually maintained with clients. "You're not much of a flyer," he observed, keeping his tone gentle. "Not particularly." She managed a weak smile. Occupational hazard when your parents died in a plane crash. The simple statement hit Connor like a physical blow. He understood loss, understood how it shaped a person's relationship with risk and trust. I'm sorry. That must make business travel difficult. You learn to cope. Board meetings via video conference, driving when possible. Avery glanced out at the storm. Emergency helicopter rides, when you make poor decisions at charity functions. Before Connor could respond, warning lights began flashing across the instrument panel. The engine temperature gauge climbed into the red zone, and an ominous grinding sound filled the cockpit. Connor's training kicked in immediately. Scan instruments, assess options, maintain control. What's happening? Avery's voice remained remarkably calm, given the circumstances. Mechanical issue. Nothing we can't handle. Connor was already scanning the landscape below for suitable landing sites. The storm had reduced visibility to nearly zero, but his GPS showed an open field about 2 miles ahead. We're going to set down and wait this out. It wasn't technically a lie, though Connor knew the landing would be harder than he'd let on. The engine was failing, power dropping with each passing second. He had minutes, maybe less, before complete failure. Hold on, he said quietly. Beginning their descent through the storm, the field appeared through the rain like a gift, flat, empty, and mercifully free of power lines or trees. Connor brought clarity down harder than he would have liked, the skids hitting soggy earth with enough force to rattle both their teeth. The helicopter bounced once, settled, and the engine finally died with a mechanical sigh that sounded almost relieved. For a moment, they sat in sudden silence, broken only by rain drumming against the cockpit windows. Connor ran through his post-emergency checklist with practiced efficiency, while Avery sat perfectly still, processing what had just happened. "Are you hurt?" Connor asked, finally turning to look at her properly. "I don't think so." She touched her forehead where a small cut had appeared, probably from when her head hit the side window during landing. "You?" Connor felt the warm trickle of blood from his own scalp wound, but ignored it. "I'm fine." "Phone working?" Avery checked her device, frowned, and shook her head. "No signal." "You!" Connor's phone showed the same. They were in a dead zone, miles from the nearest cell tower. "We'll have to wait until morning. The storm should pass by then, and search and rescue will find us when I don't check in." The reality of their situation settled over them slowly. Stranded together in a damaged helicopter, no communication with the outside world, and at least 8 hours until dawn. Connor reached into the small emergency kit behind his seat and pulled out a thermal blanket, offering it to Avery. "You should take this. Shock can cause hypothermia even when it's not cold. What about you?" She accepted the blanket, but didn't wrap it around herself. "I'm fine." Avery studied his face with the same intensity she probably brought to boardroom negotiations. "You're bleeding." Connor touched his forehead, surprised to find his fingers came away red. The adrenaline was wearing off, and various aches were beginning to make themselves known. "It's nothing serious. Let me see." Before he could protest, Avery was leaning closer, the blanket forgotten as she examined his injury with surprising gentleness. Her fingers were cool against his skin, her touch careful and sure. "You need stitches." "I've had worse." "I'm sure you have." She found a clean tissue in her purse and pressed it against the cut. "But humor me." Something in her voice made Connor look at her properly for the first time since takeoff. Without the intimidating aura of wealth and success, Avery was simply a woman who'd been frightened and was now trying to help. Her makeup had smudged during the landing, revealing freckles across her nose that somehow made her seem younger, more real. "Thank you," he said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, rain continuing to pound the cockpit windows while Avery held pressure on Connor's wound. The intimacy of the moment felt strange and unexpected, two strangers thrown together by circumstance, their usual roles and defenses stripped away by emergency. "Tell me about your daughter," Avery said suddenly. Connor stiffened. "What makes you think I have a daughter?" "The car seat base in your truck, the drawing on your dashboard." She nodded toward the crayon sketch Sophie had made of their family, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with Lisa represented by an angel floating above them. "She's talented," Connor's throat tightened. Sophie had drawn that picture during one of her grief counseling sessions, insisting he display it where he could see it every day. "Her name's Sophie. She's 8. Just the two of you?" "Her mother died 2 years ago." The words came out more easily than Connor expected, perhaps because the darkness and storm created a confessional quality to their conversation. "Cancer first, then a car accident on the way to the hospital." Avery's hand stilled against his forehead. "I'm sorry. I should have been with her. Should have driven her myself instead of taking a job that night." Connor had never said those words out loud before, not even to the grief counselor. "Sophie blames herself sometimes, thinks if she'd been a better patient. If she hadn't gotten sick so often, I wouldn't have needed to work so much." "Children always think they're responsible for things beyond their control," Avery said softly. "I blamed myself for my parents' crash for years. If I hadn't begged them to come to my school play, they wouldn't have been on that plane." The shared understanding passed between them like a current, and Connor felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time someone had listened to him talk about Lisa without offering empty platitudes or awkward sympathy? "What about you?" he asked. "Family?" Avery's laugh held no humor. "A company. Employees who depend on me. Board members who tolerate me as long as the profits keep coming." She pulled her hand away from his forehead, seemingly satisfied that the bleeding had stopped. "Not much of a life when you really examine it." Outside, lightning illuminated the field around them, showing them exactly how isolated they were. Connor realized he wasn't thinking about Sophie's worry, or Mrs. Peterson's snoring, or the bills waiting on his kitchen table. For the first time in 2 years, his mind was quiet, focused entirely on the present moment and the woman beside him. "We should try to get some rest," he said. Though he felt more awake than he had in months, Avery nodded and finally wrapped the thermal blanket around her shoulders. "Connor? Yeah? Thank you for getting us down safely." He wanted to tell her it was just training, just experience, just luck. Instead, he found himself saying, "Thank you for staying calm." Not everyone would have. As they settled in to wait for dawn, Connor couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed during their conversation. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and somewhere in that sound he heard the first notes of a song he'd forgotten how to play. Trapped in the cockpit as rain pounded the windows, Connor found himself in the most intimate situation he'd experienced with another person since Lisa's death. The helicopter felt impossibly small with Avery beside him, her presence somehow both comforting and unsettling in the confined space. "You're shivering," Avery observed, reaching behind her seat to retrieve an emergency blanket from the survival kit. "Here." She unfolded the thermal covering and draped it over Connor's shoulders, her fingers brushing against his neck as she adjusted the fabric. The touch was gentle, careful, and Connor felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm fine," he said automatically, the same response he'd given to every expression of concern for the past 2 years. "No, you're not." Avery's voice was matter-of-fact but kind. "You're hurt, you're cold, and you're trying to pretend neither of those things matter because you think that's what you're supposed to do." Connor turned to look at her properly, surprised by her directness. In the dim light from the instrument panel, Avery's face was softer than he'd ever seen it, her usual executive composure replaced by something more genuine. "You don't know me well enough to make that assessment. Maybe not. But I know what it looks like when someone's spent so long taking care of everyone else that they've forgotten how to accept help." She settled back in her seat, pulling part of the blanket over her own shoulders so they were sharing it. "The drawing on your dashboard, that's your daughter." Connor's eyes drifted to the crayon sketch Sophie had made, still visible despite the darkness. 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with a 4th figure floating above them with wings. His throat tightened. "Sophie. She's 8. The angel in the picture, that's her mother." Connor nodded, not trusting his voice. Most people avoided mentioning Lisa once they learned she was dead, as if acknowledging her existence might cause him additional pain. But Avery's question felt different. Not intrusive, just quietly interested. What was she like? The question caught Connor off guard. Lisa? Sophie drew her with a smile. She must have been someone who smiled a lot. Connor felt himself relaxing despite his best intentions. She did smile a lot, even at the end when she was so sick. She used to say that smiling was the only thing that didn't hurt. She sounds wonderful. She was. She would have liked you, I think. Lisa always said the best people were the ones who stayed calm in crisis situations. Is that what I'm doing? Staying calm? Connor studied Avery's face, noting the way her hands trembled slightly, despite her composed exterior. You stayed with me instead of worrying about yourself. You found the blanket, you're keeping me talking. Yeah, I'd say you're staying calm. I'm terrified, Avery admitted quietly. I hate flying even in perfect conditions. But somehow sitting here with you, it doesn't feel as scary as it should. Why do you hate flying? Avery was quiet for so long that Connor thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My parents died in a plane crash when I was 12. Small aircraft like this one. The pilot lost control in bad weather. Connor felt something shift in his understanding of the woman beside him. The composed CEO who'd climbed into his helicopter hours ago had been hiding a fear that made her presence here even more remarkable. I'm sorry. That must have been terrifying for you tonight. It was. But you... Avery turned to face him and Connor saw tears gathering in her eyes. You made it feel safe. Even when the engine was failing, even when we were falling, you never seemed scared. I was scared. You didn't show it. 20 years of training. But I was terrified we wouldn't make it, that Sophie would lose both her parents. Connor's voice cracked slightly. That's the thing about being a single parent. You can't just think about yourself anymore. Tell me about her. About Sophie. Connor found himself talking about his daughter in a way he hadn't done since Lisa's death. He told Avery about Sophie's love of art. Her tendency to ask impossible questions, the way she still slept with the stuffed elephant Lisa had bought her as a baby. He talked about parent-teacher conferences, where he felt completely out of his depth, about braiding hair that never looked quite right, about the crushing guilt he carried whenever work kept him away from something important. You sound like a wonderful father, Avery said when he finished. I feel like I'm failing her half the time. Lisa was so much better at the emotional stuff, the nurturing. I'm just trying to keep us both afloat. Sophie drew you holding hands with her and her mother. That doesn't look like failing to me. Connor looked again at the drawing, seeing it through Avery's eyes. Sophie had drawn all three of them connected, even in death. Maybe that said something about how secure she felt in his love, despite his doubts. What about you? Connor asked. Any family? Avery's laugh held no humor. A company full of employees who depend on me for their paychecks. A board of directors who tolerate me as long as the quarterly profits meet expectations. Not exactly the warm, fuzzy family portrait you and Sophie make. That sounds lonely. It is, but it's also safe. No one can leave you if you don't let them get close enough to matter. Connor heard the pain underneath her practiced indifference. Who left you? Everyone, eventually. Parents, obviously. Then my aunt, who raised me but made it clear I was an obligation rather than a joy. College boyfriends who got tired of competing with my ambition. Business partners who moved on to better opportunities. Avery's voice was steady, but Connor could see the cost of that composure in the set of her shoulders. I learned early that the only person you can really count on is yourself. That's a hard way to live. It's a realistic way to live. Connor thought about his own losses, his parents, who died in a car accident when he was in his 20s, and then Lisa, whose death had nearly destroyed him. But even in his grief, he'd never regretted loving them. The pain of loss was the price of having had something beautiful to lose. Maybe, he said carefully, but it's also a way of dying while you're still alive. Avery was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rain. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. When did you know? That you loved Lisa, I mean. The question surprised Connor with its intimacy. Second date. She was telling me about her job as a nurse, about this elderly patient who kept trying to escape from the hospital to feed his cat. Instead of being frustrated, Lisa thought it was sweet. She actually helped him arrange for a neighbor to take care of the cat so he could focus on getting better. She sounds like someone who saw the best in people. She did. She saw the best in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. Connor's voice grew thick with memory. The night before she died, she made me promise something. What? That I wouldn't let grief consume my whole life. That I'd eventually let someone else in, for Sophie's sake, if not my own. And have you? Let anyone else in? Connor met Avery's eyes in the dim light, feeling something pass between them that had nothing to do with their emergency situation and everything to do with two lonely people, recognizing each other. I'm sitting in a broken helicopter in the middle of nowhere, telling a virtual stranger things I haven't said out loud in 2 years. So maybe, Avery smiled, the first genuine smile Connor had seen from her. Maybe is a start. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, the rain gentling from a driving downpour to a steady patter. Dawn was still hours away, but Connor could feel something shifting in the darkness, not just the weather, but something inside himself that had been frozen for too long. Avery? Yeah? Thank you. For staying calm, for listening, for making this whole thing feel less like a disaster and more like what? Connor searched for the right words, thinking about chance encounters and unexpected connections, about the strange way life sometimes brought exactly the right person into your path at exactly the right moment, like maybe some crashes are meant to happen. Avery reached over and covered his hand with hers, her touch warm through the shared blanket. Maybe they are. As they settled in to wait for dawn, Connor found himself thinking about Lisa's final promise and Sophie's innocent wisdom about letting new people into their lives. For the first time since his wife's death, the idea of opening his heart to someone new didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a possibility. Connor waited 3 days before calling. 3 days of finding excuses to pull Avery's business card from his wallet, of starting to dial her number and then hanging up before it could ring. 3 days of Sophie asking pointed questions about the nice lady from the helicopter, and David making increasingly obvious comments about Connor's improved mood. It was Sophie's teacher who finally forced his hand, Mr. Patterson called. Mrs. Chen informed him when he picked Sophie up from school on Thursday afternoon. He'd like to schedule a meeting about Sophie's recent behavior changes. Connor felt his stomach drop. What kind of changes? She's been more withdrawn than usual, not participating in class discussions, not finishing assignments. Mrs. Chen's expression was kind but concerned. Has something happened at home? Connor looked at Sophie, who was studiously avoiding his gaze while organizing her backpack with unnecessary precision. They'd talked about the helicopter incident, and she'd seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. She'd been asking questions about Avery every day since. Nothing specific, Connor said carefully. But I'll call Mr. Patterson. The drive home was quiet, Sophie staring out the window while Connor's mind raced. He'd thought things were improving. Sophie had seemed more animated lately, more curious about the world beyond their small household. But apparently her teacher saw something different. Buck, is everything okay at school? Connor asked as they pulled into their driveway. It's fine. Mr. Patterson doesn't think it's fine. Sophie finally looked at him, her dark eyes serious. Are you going to call the helicopter lady? The question came out of nowhere, hitting Connor like a slap. What does that have to do with school? You said she made you feel like yourself. But you haven't called her. Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, but Connor could hear the underlying worry. I thought maybe you changed your mind. About being happy. Connor turned off the engine and sat in the sudden silence, processing his daughter's words. Somehow, in his caution and overthinking, he'd sent Sophie the message that his happiness was temporary, conditional, something that could disappear as quickly as it had arrived. Just like her mother had. I haven't changed my mind, Connor said quietly. I'm just scared. Of what? How could he explain to an 8-year-old that loving someone new felt like betraying someone gone? That opening his heart again meant risking the kind of loss that had nearly destroyed him once already. That every moment of connection with Avery felt both like coming alive and like committing a crime. Of messing up, he said finally. Of making decisions that hurt the people I love. Sophie unbuckled her seatbelt and twisted to face him fully. Do you think I'm scared too? The question caught Connor off guard. Of what, Bug? That you'll be sad forever. That I'll never have a mom again. That we'll always just be sad together in this house. Sophie's voice was small but steady. I liked hearing about the helicopter lady. It made me think maybe we could be different. Connor felt something crack open in his chest. He'd been so focused on protecting Sophie from further loss that he'd never considered she might be hoping for gain. That a child who'd lost her mother might dream of finding another woman to love rather than fearing it. You want me to call her? I want you to stop being scared all the time. Sophie reached over and touched his hand. Mom's not coming back, Dad, but maybe someone else could come forward. The wisdom in her words left Connor speechless. When had his 8-year-old daughter become the brave one in their family? When had she learned to see possibilities where he only saw risks? That night, after Sophie was asleep, Connor found himself holding his phone and staring at Avery's number. It was past 9 o'clock. Too late for a business call, early enough for something personal. The distinction felt important. He dialed before he could lose his nerve. Connor? Avery's voice was warm with surprise. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I'm sorry for calling so late. Don't apologize. I was hoping you would. A pause. How are you feeling? Any lingering effects from the crash? Connor touched the bandage on his forehead, which had been reduced to a simple adhesive strip. Good as new. Listen, about your offer for regular flights. You've reconsidered? I'd like to discuss it, maybe over dinner, if you're interested. The silence stretched long enough that Connor began to wonder if he'd misread everything between them. Maybe their connection had been nothing more than shared trauma and adrenaline. Maybe successful CEOs didn't date helicopter pilots with 8-year-old daughters and complicated grief. I'd like that very much, Avery said finally. But I should warn you, I don't really know how to do this. Do what? Date. Have dinner with someone I actually want to see again. It's been a while since I met anyone who made me want to try. Relief flooded through Connor so powerfully he had to sit down. It's been a while for me too. We can figure it out together. They arranged to meet Saturday evening at a small restaurant downtown, somewhere quiet where they could talk. As Connor hung up the phone, he found himself smiling for the first time since Lisa's death, without feeling guilty about it. The next morning, Sophie noticed immediately. You called her, she said over breakfast. Not making it a question, I did. And? We're having dinner on Saturday. To talk about business, Connor added quickly, though Sophie's knowing look suggested she wasn't fooled. Should I pick out something nice for you to wear? Connor nearly choked on his coffee. When did you become a dating expert? I watch a lot of movies while you're working. Sophie grinned, looking more like her old self than she had in weeks. Plus, Mrs. Peterson told me all about her nephew, who's looking for a wife, and how important first impressions are. Mrs. Peterson talks too much. Probably. But she's right about the clothes thing. You only have work shirts and sad shirts. Connor looked down at his current outfit, a faded T-shirt that had seen better decades, and realized Sophie had a point. His wardrobe consisted entirely of flight suits, a few button-downs for client meetings, and weekend clothes that had belonged to a man who'd stopped caring about appearances 2 years ago. Maybe we could go shopping, he suggested. You could help me pick something out. Sophie's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? Can we go to the mall? The nice one with the fountain. If you promise not to make me buy anything with rhinestones. Deal, but you have to trust me about colors. You always pick boring colors. As they planned their shopping expedition, Connor felt something shift in the dynamic between them. For 2 years, he'd been the sole adult, the protector, the one responsible for keeping their small family together. But now Sophie was becoming his partner in this tentative step toward something new. She was helping him be brave. Later that afternoon, David stopped by while Connor was reviewing flight logs in his home office. His friend took one look at the stack of shopping bags in the hallway and raised an eyebrow. Retail therapy. Sophie's helping me update my wardrobe. Connor tried to sound casual. For business dinners. Uh-huh. This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain CEO, would it? Connor had known David for 8 years, had flown missions with him in the Coast Guard, had stood beside him at Lisa's funeral. There was no point in lying. Her name's Avery. We're having dinner Saturday night. David's expression grew serious. You sure about this, man? It's only been 2 years. I know how long it's been. Lisa was my wife, and I loved her, and I'm going to love her until the day I die. Connor's voice was quiet, but firm. But she's gone, David. And Sophie and I are still here, still living. I don't think she'd want us to stop doing that because of her. David studied his friend's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. It's just you've been through so much. I don't want to see you get hurt again. I'm already hurt. I have been for 2 years. Maybe it's time to find out if there's something on the other side of that hurt. That evening, as Connor tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at him with Lisa's serious eyes and asked, Are you nervous about Saturday? Terrified, Connor admitted. Good. Mom always said being nervous meant you cared about something enough to worry about it. Sophie pulled her stuffed elephant closer. I think she'd like Avery. What makes you say that? Because Avery makes you smile the way Mom used to. Not the pretend smile you use when you think I'm not looking. The real one. Connor kissed his daughter's forehead, marveling once again at her perception. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just started listening. As Connor turned off her bedroom light, he realized Sophie was right about that too. For 2 years, he'd been so focused on protecting her from pain that he'd stopped hearing what she was actually trying to tell him. She wasn't just surviving their loss, she was ready to grow beyond it, and maybe, finally, so was he. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Connor stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the dark blue button-down Sophie had insisted he buy, and tried to remember the last time he'd been nervous about anything other than keeping his daughter safe. You look handsome, Dad, Sophie said from the doorway, where she was providing moral support and fashion commentary. Thanks, Bug. You sure this shirt isn't too... It's perfect. The color makes your eyes look nice. Sophie crossed the room and straightened his collar with the serious concentration of a fashion consultant. And you smell good too. Like the cologne Mom bought you for your birthday. Connor's hand stilled on his sleeve. He hadn't worn that cologne since Lisa's death. Hadn't even realized Sophie remembered it. Is that okay? Me wearing it tonight? Sophie looked up at him with an expression far too mature for her 8 years. Mom bought it because she wanted you to feel handsome. I think she'd want you to feel handsome tonight too. The simple logic of it hit Connor like a revelation. He'd been treating every reminder of Lisa like sacred ground that couldn't be disturbed. But maybe some reminders were meant to be carried forward, not preserved in amber. Maybe wearing cologne Lisa had chosen was a way of honoring her memory rather than betraying it. Thank you, he said, pulling Sophie into a hug, for helping me remember that. 20 minutes later, Connor stood outside Romano's, a small Italian restaurant known more for its intimate atmosphere than its celebrity clientele. Through the window, he could see Avery at a corner table, looking elegant in a simple black dress that somehow managed to be both professional and personal. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was warm enough to chase away his remaining nerves. You clean up well? She said, as he sat across from her. Sophie helped. Apparently, I only own work shirts and sad shirts. Avery laughed, and Connor realized he'd been hoping to hear that sound again since their phone conversation. Smart daughter. How is she handling tonight? Better than I am, honestly. She's convinced you and I are going to be great friends. Connor paused, then decided on honesty. She's been asking about you every day since the crash. Really? What kind of questions? Connor felt heat creep up his neck. Whether you're nice, whether you're pretty, whether I'm going to see you again. He met her eyes. Whether you might want to be her friend too. Something soft crossed Avery's expression. I'd like that. I don't have much experience with children, but Sophie sounds special. She is. She's also been through a lot. Her mother died 2 years ago, and Sophie's still working through that. It must be difficult, raising her alone. Connor nodded, then found himself telling Avery about Sophie's nightmares, her school troubles, the way she sometimes clung to him when he had to leave for work. He talked about parent-teacher conferences where he felt completely out of his depth, about braiding hair that never looked right, about the guilt that consumed him whenever Sophie needed something he couldn't provide. "You're a good father," Avery said when he finished. "Sophie's lucky to have someone who cares that much. Some days I feel like I'm failing her. Some days every parent feels that way. The difference is whether you keep trying to do better." Connor studied Avery's face, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "You sound like you know something about it. I was raised by my aunt after my parents died. She did her best, but she wasn't really prepared for a grieving 12-year-old. Avery's fingers traced the rim of her wineglass. "I remember what it felt like to need someone who was trying their hardest to be enough." The waiter arrived to take their order, providing a natural break in the conversation. But Connor found himself watching Avery with new understanding. The composed exterior, the professional success, the careful control. He was beginning to see the scared little girl underneath it all. "What was it like?" he asked after the waiter left. "Growing up with your aunt?" "Lonely, mostly. Aunt Patricia believed in self-reliance and emotional discipline. She gave me everything I needed to succeed professionally, but not much practice with personal connections." Avery's smile was rueful. "I suspect that's why I'm 34 and having my first real date in 3 years. 3 years. I'm very good at business dinners and networking events. Actual dating requires a level of vulnerability I'm not sure I learned how to access." Connor reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You seemed pretty vulnerable in the helicopter. When you stayed to take care of me instead of worrying about yourself, that was different. That was crisis. It's easier to be real when nothing else matters except basic human decency. Maybe that's the secret then. Maybe we just have to keep remembering that nothing else matters except basic human decency." Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Connor's early days learning to fly, Avery's first job out of business school, shared stories of small victories and embarrassing failures. But underneath the casual dinner conversation, Connor could feel something deeper developing. A recognition, perhaps, that they were both people who'd learned to be strong out of necessity, who'd built walls not out of coldness, but out of survival. "Can I ask you something?" Avery said as they shared dessert. "The wedding ring. Do you still wear it because you're not ready to take it off, or because you think you shouldn't?" Connor looked down at his left hand, where the gold band caught the restaurant's soft lighting. He'd been so focused on whether wearing it was fair to Avery that he'd never really examined what it meant to him anymore. "I think," he said slowly, "I've been wearing it because taking it off felt like admitting Lisa was really gone. But she is gone, and wearing it isn't bringing her back, but it's part of your history with her, part of what made you the man you are now." Connor lifted his eyes to meet hers. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't need you to erase your past to make room for whatever this is between us. Your love for Lisa, your grief, your experience as a husband and father, those things shaped you. I wouldn't want to be with a version of you that pretended they didn't exist." The words hit Connor with unexpected force. For 2 years, he'd been carrying his grief like a burden he needed to hide or overcome. But Avery was suggesting something revolutionary, that his past could coexist with his future, that loving Lisa didn't preclude loving someone else. "You're pretty remarkable," he said quietly. "I'm terrified," Avery corrected. "But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions." After dinner, they walked to Connor's truck in comfortable silence. The evening had been everything he'd hoped for and more. Easy conversation, genuine laughter, the kind of connection that felt both new and familiar. But as they reached his vehicle, Connor felt the weight of what came next. "I had a wonderful time," Avery said, turning to face him. "So did I." Connor hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do now. It's been a long time since I dated anyone. We could start with doing this again. Maybe next time with Sophie, if she's interested." The suggestion was so perfectly right that Connor wondered why he hadn't thought of it himself. "Of course," The next step was bringing Sophie into their developing friendship. She was his priority, his anchor, the most important person in his world. Any relationship worth having would need to include her. She'd love that, Connor said, feeling something tight in his chest finally begin to relax. Fair warning, though, she's going to ask you a million questions. I'm looking forward to it. Avery stepped closer. Close enough that Connor could smell her perfume. Something light and floral that reminded him of spring. Connor? Yeah? Thank you for taking the risk. For calling me. For tonight. For being willing to see what this could become. Before he could respond, she rose on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. A soft touch that lingered just long enough to feel intentional. Then she was stepping back, smiling at his surprised expression. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. To set up that dinner with Sophie. Connor watched her walk to her car, his hand unconsciously touching the spot where her lips had been. As she drove away, he realized he was grinning like a teenager. And for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel guilty about it. The drive home took 15 minutes, but Connor's mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow's conversation with Sophie, to planning another dinner, to the possibility that his carefully constructed world of grief and routine might be about to expand in ways he'd never imagined. Mrs. Peterson met him at the front door, her cat-scented sweater wrapped tightly around her thin frame. How did it go, dear? It went well, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you for staying with Sophie. She's a delight, as always. Spent most of the evening telling me about this Avery person and how she's going to help you remember how to smile. Connor paused in the act of hanging up his jacket. She said that? Children see more than we give them credit for. Mrs. Peterson gathered her purse and cardigan. That little girl loves you very much, Connor, but she's been worried about you being lonely. After Mrs. Peterson left, Connor checked on Sophie, finding her fast asleep with her stuffed elephant clutched against her chest. In the dim light from the hallway, she looked so much like Lisa that Connor's breath caught, but instead of the usual stab of grief, he felt something warmer. Gratitude for the beautiful child they'd created together, and hope that Sophie might soon have another adult in her life who would love and protect her. He was about to leave when Sophie's sleepy voice stopped him. Dad, how was your date? It was good, Bug. Really good. Are you going to see her again? If you want to meet her, she'd like to have dinner with both of us. Sophie sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Really? She wants to meet me. She's very interested in meeting the smart, funny daughter I can't stop talking about. What should I wear? Should I practice my best manners? Oh, should I make her a picture? Connor sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, smoothing her hair away from her face. Just be yourself. That's all anyone needs to do. I'm excited, Sophie said, settling back down. And Dad, I think Mom would be excited too. As Connor tucked the covers around his daughter, he realized Sophie was probably right. Lisa had always wanted him to be happy, had worried during her illness about what would happen to him and Sophie after she was gone. She'd made him promise, in those final weeks, that he wouldn't let grief consume his whole life. It had taken 2 years and a helicopter crash, but Connor was finally ready to keep that promise. Sunday morning brought phone calls, first from David, wanting details about the dinner, then from Avery, her voice warm with morning sleepiness as they planned their next meeting. How does Tuesday work? She asked. I could pick up dinner and bring it to your place, more comfortable for Sophie and less formal than a restaurant. That sounds perfect. Fair warning, though, our house isn't exactly mansion material. Connor, they've eaten takeout alone in my penthouse for the past 3 years. A home-cooked meal with good company sounds like paradise. After they hung up, Connor found Sophie in the kitchen, already dressed and eating cereal while making what appeared to be a list. What's that, Bug? Questions for Avery, and topics we should talk about so she doesn't get bored. Sophie held up a piece of paper covered in her careful 8-year-old handwriting. I wrote down things about school, and our house, and you, and Mom. Connor scanned the list, his heart swelling with pride and amusement. Sophie had thought, Of everything from "what's your favorite color" to "do you like kids" to "will you be nice to my dad?" These are great questions. But remember, conversation is supposed to flow naturally. You don't have to interview her. I know, but I want her to like us. Bug, look at me. Connor knelt beside Sophie's chair. Avery already likes us. She wouldn't be coming to dinner if she didn't. And if for some reason she decided she didn't want to be our friend, that would be her loss, not ours. Sophie nodded solemnly, then brightened. Can we make cookies? Mom's recipe. The request hit Connor unexpectedly. They hadn't made Lisa's chocolate chip cookies since her death, the recipe too closely associated with memories of the three of them baking together on Sunday afternoons. But looking at Sophie's hopeful face, Connor realized it was time to reclaim some of those happy traditions. I think that's a perfect idea. They spent the morning in the kitchen, flour dusting every surface as Sophie measured ingredients with the same careful precision Lisa had taught her. As the familiar smell of baking cookies filled the house, Connor felt another piece of his grief transform from sharp pain into gentle remembrance. "Do you think Avery will like them?" Sophie asked as they pulled the first batch from the oven. "I think," Connor said, watching his daughter's face light up with pride at their golden brown creation, "Avery's going to love everything about this family." And for the first time since Lisa's death, Connor truly believed it. Tuesday arrived, with Sophie changing clothes 3 times, and Connor discovering that his house looked smaller when viewed through the eyes of someone accustomed to penthouses and executive suites. The modest 2-bedroom ranch he'd bought with Lisa suddenly seemed cramped and shabby, its worn furniture and child-friendly decor a stark contrast to the sophisticated world Avery inhabited. "Stop pacing," Sophie advised from her position on the living room couch, where she was arranging her stuffed animals in what she called conversation formation. "You're making me nervous." "I'm not pacing, Dad. You've walked past the window 12 times in 5 minutes. "That's pacing." Connor forced himself to sit down, then immediately stood up again to adjust the throw pillows Lisa had bought years ago. "What if she thinks our house is too small? What if she's uncomfortable? What if you remember that she likes you already?" Sophie interrupted with the kind of logic that made Connor wonder when his 8-year-old had become the adult in their relationship. "Besides, look." She pointed to the kitchen table where they'd set out their best dishes and the plate of cookies they'd made Sunday. The afternoon light streaming through the windows made everything look warm and welcoming, and Connor realized their home had something Avery's penthouse probably lacked, the feeling of being lived in and loved. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, and Sophie jumped up with barely contained excitement. "Can I answer it, please?" Connor nodded, following behind as Sophie opened the door to reveal Avery holding several bags from what appeared to be an expensive Italian restaurant. She was dressed casually in jeans and a soft sweater, but she still managed to look elegant. "You must be Sophie," Avery said, smiling down at Connor's daughter. "I'm Avery. Your dad has told me so much about you." "Good things, I hope," Sophie replied with the kind of formal politeness that made Connor want to laugh and cringe simultaneously. "Only good things. I brought dinner, but I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got a little of everything." As Avery stepped into their living room, Connor watched her take in their home, the family photos on the mantel, Sophie's artwork covering the refrigerator, the comfortable chaos of a house where a child was being raised with love, if not luxury. "This is lovely," Avery said, and Connor could tell she meant it. "It feels like a real home." "What does your home feel like?" Sophie asked with the directness of childhood. Avery considered the question seriously. "Empty, mostly. I travel so much for work that I never really decorated it properly. It's more like a very expensive hotel room." "That sounds lonely." "It is lonely. That's why I'm so happy to be here with you and your dad." They ate dinner at the kitchen table, and Connor marveled at how naturally Avery adapted to their routine. She complimented Sophie's choice of plates, asked genuine questions about school, and listened with complete attention as Sophie explained her elaborate rating system for her stuffed animals. "So Mr. Elephant is the president of all the animals?" Avery asked, studying the grey stuffed toy Sophie had placed in the center of the table. He's the wisest. Bears are good at hugging, cats are good at secrets, but elephants never forget important things. Sophie's expression grew serious. He helped me remember all the good things about Mom after she died. Connor felt his chest tighten, but Avery simply nodded as if this made perfect sense. That's a very important job. What kinds of things does he help you remember? How she smelled like vanilla, how she always sang while she cooked, how she tucked me in every night and told me I was her sunshine. Sophie looked at her father. Dad doesn't sing while he cooks. I have many talents, Connor said. Singing is not one of them. What do you like to do when you cook? Avery asked Sophie. Make cookies. Dad and I made some for you. Sophie pointed proudly to the plate they'd prepared. It's Mom's recipe, but we made them ourselves. As they shared the cookies, Connor found himself relaxing for the first time since Avery had arrived. The conversation flowed easily between the three of them, Sophie's natural curiosity drawing stories from Avery about her work, her travels, her own childhood. Connor learned that Avery had wanted to be a teacher before her parents died, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, that she'd never learned to ride a bicycle. Never. Sophie's eyes widened with the shock of someone for whom bike riding was as natural as breathing. My aunt thought it was too dangerous. She preferred activities that could be controlled and measured. That's sad, Sophie declared. Riding bikes is one of the best things about being alive. Maybe you could teach me sometime, Avery suggested, and Sophie's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? I'm a very good teacher. I helped Jerry from next door learn, and he was really scared at first. As the evening progressed, Connor watched something beautiful unfold. Sophie's initial shyness gave way to genuine warmth, and Avery's carefully maintained composure softened into something more real. When Sophie brought out her photo albums to show Avery pictures of Lisa, Connor braced himself for awkwardness. Instead, Avery studied each photo with respectful attention, asking questions about Lisa's garden, her job as a nurse, the family traditions they'd shared. She was beautiful, Avery said, looking at Connor's wedding photo. You can see how much she loved you both. She would have liked you, Sophie said matter-of-factly. She always said the best people are the ones who listen with their whole hearts. Connor saw tears gather in Avery's eyes before she blinked them away. That's the nicest compliment anyone's ever given. Me, after Sophie went to bed, only after. Extracting promises from Avery to come back soon and help. With the bicycle lessons, Connor and Avery found themselves alone on the front porch, sharing a bottle of wine and listening to the quiet sounds of their suburban neighborhood. Thank you, Connor said, for tonight, for the way you were with Sophie. She hasn't opened up to anyone new since Lisa died. She's remarkable, wise beyond her years, but still so innocent. Avery tucked her feet under herself in the porch swing. I can see why you're so proud of her. I am. But I also worry about her constantly. Wonder if I'm doing enough, if she needs things I can't give her. Like what? A mother. Someone who understands girl things better than I do. Someone who can teach her about relationships and self-confidence and all the things Lisa would have shared with her. Avery was quiet for a moment, then said, Can I tell you something about growing up without those things? Connor nodded, and Avery pulled something from her purse, a small, faded photograph of herself as a child with an older woman. This is me with my Aunt Patricia. She loved me in her way, but she'd never had children. She taught me to be self-sufficient and successful, but she couldn't teach me how to connect with people, how to trust my emotions, or accept help, or believe I deserved to be loved just for who I was. Connor studied the photo, seeing a young Avery who looked simultaneously poised and lost. Sophie has something I never had, Avery continued. She has a father who loves her unconditionally, who shows her every day that she's valued and cherished. That foundation, that's what will carry her through everything else. The rest is just details. You really think so? I know so, because I can see the difference between who I became and who she's becoming. Sophie is confident and curious and kind because she knows she's loved. That's not something you can fake or manufacture. It's something you give through 1,000 small moments of attention and care. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies blink in the growing darkness. Connor found himself thinking about the path that had brought them here. His grief and fear, Avery's loneliness and caution, Sophie's resilient hope that had somehow bridged the gap between two damaged adults. "Avery," Connor said finally. "Sophie asked me yesterday if you might want to be part of our family." "Not immediately," he added quickly, seeing her startled expression. "But someday, if things keep going the way they're going." "What did you tell her?" "That it was too early to know for sure, but that I hoped so." Avery turned to face him fully, her expression serious in the porch light. "Connor, I need you to understand something. I've spent my entire adult life building walls, keeping people at a distance, protecting myself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. 6 months ago, the idea of sitting on a front porch talking about family would have sent me running." Connor felt his stomach drop. "And now?" "Now I'm terrified and excited and more hopeful than I've been since I was 12 years old." Avery reached for his hand. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I can't promise I know how to be what Sophie needs or what you need. But I can promise I want to try. That's all anyone can promise." "Is it enough?" Connor thought about Lisa, about the vows they'd made to each other so many years ago. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, for as long as they both shall live. They'd kept those promises until death parted them. But death had also freed him to make new promises, different ones, built on the foundation of everything he'd learned about love and loss and the courage it took to try again. "It's everything," he said, lifting their joined hands to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "It's absolutely everything." 3 weeks later, Connor's carefully rebuilt world shattered in the space of a single phone call. He was reviewing flight schedules in his home office when his phone rang. Sophie's school flashing on the caller ID. Connor answered with the casual confidence of a parent who'd grown accustomed to routine calls about forgotten lunch money or permission slips. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Principal Davidson. Sophie's had an accident on the playground. She's being taken to Memorial Hospital." The words hit Connor like a physical blow, the phone nearly slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers. "What kind of accident? How bad is it?" "She fell from the monkey bars. Her arm appears to be broken, but she's conscious and alert. The paramedics are loading her into the ambulance now." Connor was already grabbing his keys, his mind racing through logistics while his heart hammered against his ribs. "I'll meet you there. Please tell her I'm coming." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of red lights and worst-case scenarios. Connor's hands shook on the steering wheel as he thought about Sophie, scared and hurt and calling for him. Every terrible possibility cascaded through his mind. Complications, surgery, permanent damage. The rational part of his brain insisted it was just a broken arm, that children broke bones all the time and healed perfectly. But rationality had no power over the primal terror of a parent racing toward their injured child. He'd barely parked when his phone rang again. Avery's name appeared on the screen, and Connor answered without thinking. "Connor, I just heard. I'm on my way to the hospital. How did you—" "Sophie's teacher called the emergency contacts. I'm listed as one of them, remember? From when you were working late last week." Connor had forgotten that he'd added Avery to Sophie's emergency list, a decision that had seemed practical at the time. Now he felt a rush of gratitude that his daughter wouldn't have to face this alone if something went wrong. "She's conscious," Connor said, more to reassure himself than Avery. "It's just her arm. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Connor found Sophie in the emergency room, looking impossibly small in the adult-sized hospital bed. Her left arm was splintered and elevated, and her face was streaked with tears, but she was awake and talking to the nurse. When she saw him, her bottom lip trembled. "Daddy, it hurts." Connor was beside her in 2 strides, careful not to jostle her injured arm as he gathered her against his chest. "I know, Bug. I know it hurts. But you're going to be okay. I was trying to go across the monkey bars, like the big kids, and I fell." Sophie's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. Accidents happen. That's why they're called accidents. Dr. Rodriguez, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, approached with Sophie's x-rays. Clean break in the radius, she explained, showing Connor the images. Very common injury for children Sophie's age. 6 weeks in a cast and she'll be good as new. Connor felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. 6 weeks. Manageable, normal. Not the catastrophic injury his imagination had conjured during the drive. Can I still ride my bike? Sophie asked, her practical nature asserting itself despite the circumstances. After the cast comes off, absolutely. But no more monkey bar adventures until you're a little taller, okay? Sophie nodded solemnly, then brightened as she spotted Avery hurrying toward them. Avery, did you see my x-ray? You can see my bones. Avery approached carefully, her face pale with concern. I did see it. Very impressive bones you have there. She looked at Connor over Sophie's head. How are you holding up? Better now, Connor meant it. Having Avery there somehow made everything feel more manageable, as if the burden of worry was shared rather than carried alone. As the medical staff worked to apply Sophie's cast, Connor found himself watching Avery interact with his daughter. She stayed close enough to provide comfort, but gave the doctors room to work. Asked Sophie questions about cast color preferences to distract her from the procedure, and somehow managed to make the whole experience feel less frightening. What color did you choose? Avery asked as the technician prepared the casting materials. Purple! It's my favorite, and Dad says it's the color of royalty. Excellent choice. You'll be the most regal patient in the hospital. It wasn't until they were settling Sophie in Connor's truck for the ride home that the full impact of the afternoon hit him. As he watched Avery carefully adjust Sophie's seatbelt around her cast, Connor felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door he'd kept locked for too long. Thank you, he said, as Avery closed Sophie's door and walked around to where he stood by the driver's side. For coming, for being here. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Avery's voice was firm. Sophie called for you and me when they brought her in. She wanted both of us here. Connor stared at her. She asked for you. The nurse said she kept saying, call my dad and call Avery. She considers me family, Connor. And I consider both of you family, too. The words should have been comforting, but instead they triggered something cold and familiar in Connor's chest. Family. The people you loved most, the people you couldn't survive losing. Lisa had been family, and cancer had taken her anyway. Sophie was family, and she'd just spent 2 hours in a hospital bed, vulnerable and breakable and precious beyond measure. Connor? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Connor's hands were shaking again, but not from worry about Sophie's injury. They were shaking from the sudden, overwhelming awareness of how much he had to lose now. A month ago, his world had consisted of himself and Sophie, manageable grief, controlled risk. Now Avery was part of that world, which meant there was one more person who could be taken away, one more way for his carefully constructed life to collapse. I need to get Sophie home, he said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. Avery studied his face with growing concern. Connor, talk to me. What's happening? But Connor was already climbing into the truck, his mind spiraling back to another hospital, another emergency, another night when he'd gotten the call that changed everything. Lisa's final trip to the emergency room, the one she'd made alone while he was flying executives to golf tournaments. The doctor's gentle voice explaining that she'd been gone for 20 minutes before the ambulance arrived. The wedding ring he'd had to remove from her cold finger. Dad? Sophie's voice from the back seat pulled him back to the present. Are you okay? Connor forced a smile into the rearview mirror. I'm fine, Bug. Just tired. But as he drove home, Avery following in her own car, Connor couldn't shake the image that had invaded his mind. The hospital bracelet from Lisa's final night. The one he'd kept hidden in his wallet for 2 years, like a talisman of his failure to protect the people he loved most. He'd thought he was ready to risk his heart again. But sitting in that hospital, watching another woman he loved comfort his injured daughter, Connor realized he'd been fooling himself. He wasn't brave enough for this. He wasn't strong enough to love someone new when losing them would destroy not just him, but Sophie too. By the time they reached home, Connor had made a decision that felt like swallowing glass, but seemed like the only way to protect what was left of his family. He was going to have to let Avery go before it was too late to survive losing her. The change in Connor was immediate and devastating. Over the next 2 weeks, he became a master of polite distance, accepting Avery's calls, but keeping conversations brief and professional. When she suggested visiting Sophie, he made excuses about doctor's appointments and catch-up schoolwork. When she offered to help with Sophie's care while her arm healed, Connor insisted they were managing fine on their own. Avery tried to understand. She told herself Connor was overwhelmed, stressed about Sophie's injury, struggling with the practical challenges of caring for a child with a broken arm. But as the days stretched into a second week with no improvement in his demeanor, she began to suspect something deeper was wrong. "He's scared," David told her bluntly when she finally called Connor's friend in desperation. They'd met several times over the past month, and David had become an unexpected ally in her relationship with Connor. Hospital visits bring back bad memories for him, but Sophie's fine. "It was just a broken arm. You don't understand." When Lisa was sick, Connor lived at that hospital for months, watched her get weaker and weaker while the doctors ran out of options. The night she died, he was flying some corporate executive to a business dinner while his wife was driving herself to the emergency room. Avery felt her heart clench. He blames himself. He's carried that guilt for 2 years. And now he's terrified that caring about you means he'll fail someone else he loves. So what do I do? David was quiet for a long moment. You give him space, and you pray he comes to his senses before he destroys the best thing that's happened to him since Lisa died. But space felt like surrender. And Avery had spent too many years building walls to accept that Connor was building his own without a fight. She'd seen the way he looked at her, the way he'd held her hand on his front porch, the way he'd talked about their future together. That connection hadn't been imaginary, and she refused to let fear, his or hers, erase it without a battle. Meanwhile, Sophie was becoming increasingly agitated by her father's behavior. The 8-year-old had quickly noticed that Avery's visits had stopped, that Connor's phone conversations were shorter, that the easy warmth that had characterized their household for the past month had been replaced by a tense politeness. "Why doesn't Avery come over anymore?" Sophie asked for the 3rd time in as many days. Her purple cast propped on a pillow while she attempted to color with her non-dominant hand. "She's busy with work," Connor replied, not looking up from the dishes he was washing with unnecessary vigor. "Did you have a fight?" "No, Bug. No fight. Then why do you look sad when her name comes up? And why did you hang up so fast when she called yesterday?" Connor dried his hands slowly, stalling for time. How could he explain to his 8-year-old daughter that he was pulling away from the woman they both cared about because he was terrified of losing her? How could he make Sophie understand that sometimes love meant walking away before the inevitable ending could destroy everyone involved? "Sometimes adults need space to figure things out," he said finally. "That's what you said when Mrs. Peterson got mad at Mr. Henderson about the fence. But they figured it out and they're friends again. This is different. How?" Connor turned to face his daughter, seeing Lisa's determined expression in Sophie's serious eyes. "Because sometimes caring about someone means protecting them from getting hurt." "Who's getting hurt?" "All of us. If things don't work out." Sophie set down her crayon and studied her father with the penetrating stare she'd inherited from her mother. "Dad, do you love Avery?" The question hit Connor like a physical blow. He'd been avoiding that word, even in his own thoughts, as if naming his feelings would make them more dangerous. But looking at Sophie's expectant face, he found he couldn't lie. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do. Does she love you?" "I think so." "Does she love me?" Connor thought about the way Avery had rushed to the hospital, the gentleness with which she'd helped Sophie choose her cast color, the genuine warmth in her voice whenever she talked to or about his daughter. "Yes, Bug. She loves you very much. Then why are you protecting us from her?" "That doesn't make sense." The simple logic of it left Connor speechless. From Sophie's perspective, 3 people who loved each other were choosing to stay apart because of problems that existed only in Connor's imagination. His 8-year-old daughter could see what he'd been too afraid to acknowledge, that the real danger wasn't in loving Avery, but in letting fear destroy their chance at happiness. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Connor found himself in his bedroom, staring at the small wooden box where he kept Lisa's jewelry and personal effects. Hidden beneath her wedding ring and pearl necklace was the hospital bracelet from her final night, a plastic band with her name, birth date, and the timestamp of her admission. Connor had kept it as a reminder of his failure, proof that he'd chosen work over family when it mattered most. But as he held the bracelet in the lamplight, Connor realized it told a different story than the one he'd been carrying. The timestamp showed Lisa had been admitted at 11:47 p.m., 47 minutes after Connor's flight had taken off. Even if he'd turned down the job, even if he'd stayed home, he still wouldn't have been able to drive her to the hospital. Her decision to go alone hadn't been about his absence. It had been about not wanting to wake Sophie, not wanting to worry Connor over what she'd thought was just another bout of nausea. Lisa had died because cancer was stronger than medicine, not because Connor had failed to protect her. He'd been carrying guilt over circumstances that had been beyond his control, letting that misplaced responsibility rob him and Sophie of 2 years of potential happiness. His phone buzzed with a text from Avery. "Sophie's school play is tomorrow night. He thought you should know she asked me to come. I said I'd check with you first." Connor stared at the message, his throat tight with emotion. Of course, Sophie had invited Avery to her school play. Of course, she'd wanted both of the adults she loved to watch her perform. And of course, Avery had respected his boundaries enough to ask permission before accepting. He started to type a response 3 different times, deleting each attempt. What could he say? That he'd been pushing her away because he was terrified of losing her? That he'd spent 2 weeks convincing himself that loving her was too dangerous, when the real danger was in not loving her enough to fight for their future? Instead of texting back, Connor called. "Connor?" Avery's voice was cautious, as if she was bracing herself for another polite brush-off. "She invited you to the play." "She did. But I won't go if you prefer I didn't." Connor closed his eyes, hearing the hurt she was trying to hide. "Avery, I need to tell you something. About why I've been pushing me away, I know. David explained about the hospital, about Lisa. I understand why you're scared." "Do you?" "Because I'm not sure I understand it myself anymore." "Connor, I'm scared too. I've never done this before, cared about someone enough to risk everything. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you." The words broke something open in Connor's chest, some knot of fear and guilt he'd been carrying for so long it had become part of him. "I love you," he said, the words rushing out before he could stop them. "I love you so much it terrifies me. And I love the way you are with Sophie, and the way you make our house feel like a home. And I've been pushing you away because I'm terrified of losing you. You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that." "No, I can't. But I can promise that pushing me away guarantees you'll lose me, and that's not protecting anyone. That's just choosing fear over love." Connor sank onto his bed, the hospital bracelet still clutched in his free hand. "I don't know how to do this, how to love someone new without feeling like I'm betraying Lisa's memory." "You're not betraying anything. You're honoring it. You're showing Sophie that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just grows to include new people. You're teaching her that it's possible to move forward without leaving the past behind. Will you come to the play tomorrow?" "Only if you want me there." "I want you there. I want you everywhere, Avery. I want you in our lives, in our family, in our future. If you still want that too." "I've never wanted anything more." After they hung up, Connor sat in the quiet of his bedroom, still holding Lisa's hospital bracelet. But instead of a symbol of failure, it now felt like a reminder of how precious and fragile life was. How important it was to choose love over fear whenever possible. He opened his bedside drawer and placed the bracelet inside, next to a photo of Lisa and a business card from a helicopter charter service. Tomorrow he would tell Sophie that Avery was coming to her play. Tomorrow he would stop hiding from the possibility of happiness. Tomorrow he would choose love. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with the familiar chaos of a children's theater production. Parents juggled programs and flowers, while teachers herded costume students behind makeshift curtains. Connor arrived 20 minutes early, clutching a bouquet of daisies, Sophie's favorite, and scanning the crowd for Avery. He found her in the third row, saving a seat with her purse, looking as nervous as he felt. She dressed carefully for the occasion, in a soft blue dress that was elegant but not ostentatious, clearly wanting to fit in with the other parents rather than stand out as the wealthy executive she was in her professional life. "Thank you for coming," Connor said, as he settled into the seat beside her. "Thank you for asking me to." Avery's smile was tentative, as if she wasn't quite sure they were back on solid ground yet. "How is she feeling about tonight?" "Excited and terrified. She's been practicing her lines for weeks, but this morning she was convinced she'd forgotten everything. Stage fright is normal. She'll be wonderful." They sat in slightly awkward silence, both hyper-aware of the conversation they'd had the night before, both uncertain how to navigate this new understanding between them. Connor kept glancing at Avery, noticing the way she studied the program with intense concentration, the way her hands twisted the strap of her purse. "Avery," he said quietly, leaning closer so he wouldn't be overheard. "About last night, we don't have to talk about it now. Tonight should be about Sophie," but Connor shook his head. "I need to say this. I need you to know that I'm sorry. For the past 2 weeks, for pulling away, for letting my fear hurt you, you were protecting yourself. I understand. No, I was being a coward. And I was hurting Sophie too. She's been asking about you every day." Avery's expression softened. "She has? She knows something's wrong. Kids always know. And she—" Connor stopped as the lights dimmed and the curtain began to rise. The play was a simple adaptation of a fairy tale, with second graders portraying various woodland creatures helping a lost princess find her way home. Sophie appeared in the third scene as a wise rabbit, her purple cast cleverly incorporated into her costume as a magical bracelet. Connor felt his heart swell with pride as Sophie delivered her lines with perfect clarity, her natural stage presence evident even in her small role. But what made his throat tight with emotion was the way Sophie's eyes kept scanning the audience until they found him and Avery sitting together. Her whole face lit up when she spotted them, and Connor realized how much his daughter had missed having both of her favorite adults in the same place. "She's remarkable," Avery whispered, leaning close enough that Connor could smell her perfume. "Look how confident she is up there." Connor nodded, unable to trust his voice. On stage, Sophie was helping the lost princess understand that sometimes you had to trust new people to find your way home. And the parallel to their own situation wasn't lost on him. When the play ended and the children took their bows, Sophie waved enthusiastically at Connor and Avery, clearly thrilled that they were both there to see her triumph. As the audience began to disperse, Connor spotted Sophie's teacher approaching with a young girl he didn't recognize, Mr. Sullivan. "This is Claire, one of Sophie's classmates. She wanted to meet you." Claire was about Sophie's age, with dark hair in pigtails and an expression of shy curiosity. "Sophie talks about you all the time," she said to Connor. "And about Miss Avery, too. She says you're going to be a family." Connor felt heat rise in his cheeks as he glanced at Avery, who was trying not to smile. "Sophie has a big imagination. She showed us the picture," Claire continued innocently. "The one from when you were all together at her house. She keeps it in her desk." "What picture?" Connor asked, genuinely confused. "I'll get Sophie," Avery said quickly, clearly sensing Connor's bewilderment. "She'll want to see you both before we leave." As Avery headed toward the backstage area, Connor found himself surrounded by other parents offering congratulations on Sophie's performance. But his mind was stuck on Claire's words. What picture had Sophie been showing her classmates? And when had it been taken? "Dad!" Sophie's voice cut through the crowd as she launched herself toward him. still wearing her rabbit ears and clutching a juice box someone had given her. "Did you see me? Did I do good?" "You did perfectly, Bug. I'm so proud of you." Connor lifted her into a careful hug, mindful of her cast. "Miss Avery is here too." "I know. I saw you sitting together, and I was so happy I almost forgot my first line." Sophie beamed at Avery, who had appeared beside them with Sophie's backpack and street clothes. "Did you like the play?" "I loved it. You were the best rabbit I've ever seen." Avery knelt to Sophie's level. "Your friend Claire mentioned a picture you've been showing at school." Sophie's expression grew sheepish. "Oh, that picture. What picture, Bug?" Connor asked gently. Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. When she unfolded it, Connor's breath caught. It was a photo from their dinner at his house 3 weeks ago. Somehow Sophie had convinced someone to take a picture of the three of them at their kitchen table. Connor and Avery flanking Sophie as she showed off the cookies they'd made. In the photo, they looked like exactly what Claire had assumed they were, a family. Connor's hand was on Sophie's shoulder. Avery was laughing at something Sophie had said, and all three of them looked genuinely happy. Natural. "Right. When did you take this?" Connor asked, his voice oddly hoarse. "I asked Mrs. Peterson to take it when she came to check on us. I wanted to remember that night because it was the best night we'd had since Mom died." Sophie's voice grew smaller. "I've been showing it to my friends because I wanted them to know what my family looks like now." Connor felt Avery's sharp intake of breath beside him. The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with all the hope and fear and possibility they'd been dancing around for weeks. "Sophie," Connor said carefully, "what do you mean, your family?" "You and me and Avery, that's our family now, isn't it?" Sophie looked between them with the devastating honesty of childhood. "I know Mom is still part of our family in heaven, but Avery is part of our family here, right?" Connor met Avery's eyes over Sophie's head, seeing his own emotions reflected there, love and terror and desperate hope, all tangled together. His daughter had just articulated what he'd been too afraid to say out loud, and now there was no taking it back, no pretending they were just casually dating while they figured things out. Sophie had claimed Avery as family, and Connor realized that somewhere along the way his heart had done the same thing. The drive home from the school was quiet, Sophie dozing in the back seat while Connor and Avery sat in the front, both processing what had just happened. The photo lay on the dashboard between them like evidence of something they'd been too careful to name. "She thinks we're already a family," Avery said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's been thinking it for weeks." "Apparently," Connor glanced in the rearview mirror at his sleeping daughter. "I should have realized." "How could you? She's 8 years old. Who expects an 8-year-old to be planning family structures?" "Sophie's always been wise beyond her years. Lisa used to say she was born with an old soul." Connor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "But this, claiming you as family, that's not something I can take back or explain away." "Do you want to take it back?" The question hung between them as Connor pulled into his driveway. Avery's car was parked on the street where she'd left it before the play, but neither of them moved to get out. Sophie continued sleeping, exhausted from the excitement of her performance. "No," Connor said finally. "I don't want to take it back, but I'm terrified of what it means. What does it mean to you?" Connor turned to face Avery fully, seeing his own vulnerability reflected in her expression. "It means I love you, not just care about you or enjoy spending time with you. I'm in love with you in the way that changes everything, that makes every decision about more than just me and Sophie. Connor, it means I want you to move in with us. I want to wake up next to you every morning and figure out parenting decisions together and fight about whose turn it is to do the dishes." The words came faster now, as if a dam had broken. "It means I want to marry you, even though that terrifies me because I never thought I'd love anyone the way I loved Lisa." Avery's eyes filled with tears. "And now?" "Now I know love isn't finite. I don't love you instead of Lisa. I love you because of everything Lisa taught me about what love could be. She made me a better man, and that better man fell in love with you." Connor reached into his wallet and pulled out the folded paper he'd been carrying for 2 years. not Avery's business card, but a letter Lisa had written to him during her final hospital stay. His hands shook as he unfolded it. She wrote this when she knew she was dying. "I've read it maybe twice because it hurt too much," Connor's voice cracked. "But last night after we talked I read it again." He handed the letter to Avery, who took it with careful hands as if it were made of glass. "My darling Connor," she read aloud, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're trying to figure out how to live without me. Please don't spend your whole life grieving for me. I need you to promise me something when you meet someone who makes you laugh the way I used to, someone who loves Sophie like she deserves, someone who helps you remember that you're more than just a widowed father. I need you to let yourself love her." Avery's voice broke, and she had to pause before continuing. "Sophie needs to see that love doesn't end with death. It just makes room for new beginnings. And you need to remember that the best way to honor our marriage is to be brave enough to risk your heart again. I'm not asking you to forget me. I'm asking you to remember that happiness was always what I wanted most for you. Find it, Connor. Choose it. And when you do, know that I'm cheering for you both." Avery finished reading and looked up at Connor, tears streaming down her face. "She gave you permission to love again. She gave me a roadmap. And you're the destination." Connor gently took the letter back, refolding it with the same care he'd shown for 2 years. But this time, instead of putting it away like a guilty secret, he slipped it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. "Avery, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay, do you want this? Not just me, but all of it. Sophie's school plays and broken bones and bedtime stories. PTA meetings and Sunday morning pancakes and teaching an 8-year-old how to ride a bike. Do you want to be someone's stepmother with all the messy, complicated, wonderful responsibility that comes with it?" Avery was quiet for a long moment, and Connor felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the moment of truth, when the fantasy of their relationship met the reality of what a future together would actually require. 6 months ago, I would have said no, Avery said finally. I would have been terrified of the responsibility, convinced I'd somehow damaged Sophie or failed to live up to her mother's memory. But Connor, watching you with her, seeing how she's grown and flourished despite everything she's been through, I realized that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up consistently and caring deeply and being willing to learn. And I want to learn. I want to show up for both of you every single day. I want to be the person Sophie runs to when she's excited about something, and the person she trusts when she's scared. I want to be your partner in raising this remarkable little girl into an even more remarkable woman." Connor felt something tight in his chest, finally release completely. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Avery reached across the console and took his hand. "But I need to know something too. Are you ready for this? Really ready? Because I can't handle being pushed away again. The next time something scares you, I'm ready. Or maybe I'm not, but I'm willing to try anyway. And I promise I won't run again. No matter what happens, we face it together." In the back seat, Sophie stirred and opened her eyes, blinking in confusion at the darkened car. "Are we home?" "We're home, Bug," Connor said, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you and Avery done talking about grown-up things?" Connor and Avery exchanged a look, both of them smiling through their tears. "Yeah," Connor said. "We're done talking about grown-up things. Good. Can Avery come inside? I want to show her my costume up close." "I'd love to see your costume," Avery said, squeezing Connor's hand before letting go. "But first, I have something I want to tell you." Sophie sat up straighter, suddenly alert. "What?" "Your dad and I have been talking, and we've decided that we want to be a real family. The 3 of us, together." Sophie's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? You mean it?" "We mean it," Connor confirmed. "If that's what you want too." "It's what I've wanted since the night you crashed the helicopter," Sophie said with matter-of-fact honesty that made both adults laugh. "I just had to wait for you to be brave enough." As they gathered their things and headed toward the house, Connor realized Sophie was right. He'd had to learn to be brave enough, not just to love Avery, but to trust that love could coexist with loss, that choosing happiness didn't mean dishonoring grief, and that sometimes the best way to protect the people you care about is to refuse to let fear make your decisions. Walking up the front steps with Avery's hand in his and Sophie chattering excitedly about their future plans, Connor felt like he was finally coming home. 6 months later, Connor stood in the same field where he and Avery had crash-landed, but instead of emergency sirens and storm clouds, the morning was filled with the gentle bustle of wedding preparations. White chairs arranged in neat rows faced an altar decorated with wildflowers, and a small group of their closest friends and family waited for the ceremony to begin. Sophie stood beside him in a pale yellow dress, her arm long since healed, and her role as flower girl taken very seriously. She clutched a small basket of rose petals with one hand and tugged at Connor's tie with the other. "You look nervous, Dad." "I'm not nervous. I'm excited. You look nervous too. But the good kind of nervous, like when you're about to do something really important." Connor smiled down at his daughter, marveling at her perceptiveness. She was right, he was nervous, but it was the anticipation kind of nervousness that came with standing on the threshold of something wonderful. "Are you excited too, Bug?" "I'm so excited I might explode." Sophie grinned up at him. "I get to be Avery's daughter today, officially. The adoption papers had been finalized the week before, a legal formality that made official what had been true in their hearts for months. Avery was now Sophie's stepmother in every sense that mattered, and Sophie had never been happier. David appeared at Connor's shoulder, straightening his own tie and checking his watch. "You ready for this, man?" "More than ready." "Good, because she's about to come down the aisle. And you don't want to miss this." The string quartet began playing, and Connor's breath caught as Avery appeared at the far end of the field, walking slowly toward them through the wildflowers. She wore a simple white dress that moved gracefully in the morning breeze, her hair loose around her shoulders, carrying a bouquet of the same wildflowers that decorated their altar. But what made Connor's throat tight with emotion wasn't how beautiful she looked, though she was radiant. It was the expression on her face. Pure joy, complete certainty, love so evident it seemed to light her from within. As she drew closer, Connor noticed the small details that made this moment perfect. Lisa's pearl necklace around Avery's throat, something Sophie had insisted she wear as something borrowed. The locket that had been Lisa's tucked into Sophie's bouquet, keeping their memories close while celebrating their new beginning. When Avery reached them, she paused to kiss Sophie's forehead before taking Connor's hands. "You're beautiful," Connor whispered. "So are you." Avery's voice was soft but steady. "All of you." The ceremony was simple but profound, with vows they'd written themselves that spoke of second chances and blended families and the courage it took to love again after loss. When the officiant asked if they promised to create a home filled with laughter and understanding and unconditional support, all three of them answered, "I do." Sophie had insisted on adding her own vows, promising to help Connor and Avery remember to have fun, to always tell the truth about important things, and to never forget that families were built on love, not just blood. When Connor slipped the ring onto Avery's finger, his grandmother's engagement ring, reset with Lisa's blessing and Sophie's enthusiastic approval, he felt the last of his guilt about moving forward finally dissolve. This wasn't betraying the past. This was honoring it by choosing to build something beautiful on the foundation it had provided. "I now pronounce you husband and wife and daughter," the officiant said with a smile. "Connor, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, but it was interrupted by Sophie's delighted squeal and enthusiastic applause from their small audience. When they broke apart, Connor found himself laughing through tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. "We did it," Avery whispered against his ear. "We did it," he agreed, pulling both his wife and daughter into a family hug that felt like coming home. The reception was held at Connor's house, their house now, with the backyard transformed by string lights and more wildflowers. As the afternoon wore on, Connor found himself watching Avery teach some of the neighborhood children how to play a complicated clapping game. Her laughter bright and genuine as she patiently corrected their rhythm. "She's good at this," David observed, joining Connor at the edge of the patio. "Yeah, she is. Better than she thought she'd be. And you? Any regrets?" Connor considered the question seriously, thinking about the path that had brought them here. The grief and fear, the crash landing that had seemed like disaster but had actually been salvation. The gradual building of trust and love between three people who'd needed each other more than they'd known. "None," he said finally. "Not a single one." As the sun set, Connor and Avery found themselves slow dancing to music from the small speaker Sophie had insisted they set up. Their daughter was running around the yard with the other children, her yellow dress grass-stained and her hair coming loose from its careful arrangement, looking perfectly, completely happy. "What are you thinking about?" Avery asked, following Connor's gaze to where Sophie was attempting to teach a younger boy how to do a cartwheel. "How different this is from what I thought my life would look like. Different good or different bad?" "Different amazing." Connor spun Avery slowly, admiring the way the string lights caught in her hair. "A year ago, I thought Sophie and I were a complete family. I thought adding anyone else would somehow diminish what we had. And now I know that love multiplies rather than divides. Sophie isn't getting less of me because I love you. She's getting more of everything. More laughter, more support, more examples of what healthy relationships look like. She's getting the mother she deserves. And I'm getting the partner I never thought I'd be." Brave enough to want again, as the evening wound down and their guests began to leave. Connor helped Sophie into her pajamas, while Avery cleaned up the kitchen. It was a domestic scene that felt both wonderfully normal and impossibly precious, the kind of ordinary evening he'd dreamed of during those dark months after Lisa's death, when he'd wondered if their small family would ever feel complete again. "Dad," Sophie said as he tucked her into bed. "Are you happy?" "Incredibly happy, Bug." "Are you?" "The happiest I've ever been. Even happier than when Mom was alive, because now I know that sad things don't last forever." Connor felt his throat close with emotion. "That's right, sweetheart. Sad things don't last forever, and neither do happy things, but that's okay, because new happy things keep coming along. When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just keep forgetting." Connor kissed Sophie's forehead and turned off her bedside lamp, leaving her door cracked open the way she liked it. In the hallway, he found Avery waiting for him, still in her wedding dress but barefoot now, looking tired and content and absolutely perfect. "How's our daughter?" she asked, and Connor's heart squeezed at how naturally she said, "our." Wise beyond her years and completely happy. "Good. That's all I ever wanted for her." "What about what you want for you?" Avery stepped into his arms, fitting against him like she'd been designed to be there. "I want exactly this. This house, this family, this life we're building together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night and figure out all the ordinary, extraordinary details of being married to you. Even when I leave my socks on the floor and forget to put the toilet seat down. Especially then, I want all of it, Connor. The mundane and the magical and everything in between." Connor held his wife close, breathing in the scent of her perfume mixed with the wildflowers from their wedding bouquet. Through the window, he could see the field where they'd first crashed, where fear and circumstance had forced them together and started them on the path to this moment. Sometimes, Connor thought as he and Avery headed toward their bedroom, the best things in life began with what felt like disasters. Sometimes you had to crash land before you could learn to fly.